Okay, let's move on to Comp 7, overlapping action. Overlapping action is probably the single most important animation principle that the motion graphics designer can keep in mind. While some of the other animation principles like squash and stretch might not always be appropriate, of course, if you want to create a kind of fun, playful attitude with a piece, squash and stretch can be a lot of help. If you want to create a little bit more of a clean, fluid, slick, sophisticated type of mood with your animation, then you probably want to minimize the amount of squash and stretch that you're using. But overlapping action is something that you'll want to use almost all the time. The idea behind overlapping action is that, well, let me explain what you don't want to do. You don't want to have animation where one thing is happening on the screen at a time. This thing flies in, then that thing flies in, then the next thing flies in. It creates a very kind of staccato start and stop type of motion that's really jarring to the viewer. You want to kind of suck them in and pull them along for the ride and create a flow to your animation. On the other end of the spectrum, you don't want everything to all fly into the screen at the same time. What you want is something kind of in between. You want overlapping motion. So let me demonstrate here in Comp 7. We've got these three text layers, and I'm going to set some simple keyframe animation, 15 frame, slide in for the word motion. Same kind of thing for the word graphics, but graphics is going to slide in from this side. And then the phrase make it move is going to slide in from the right. By the way, this is a good idea to kind of alternate. You don't want everything always coming in from the same side, so it can be a good idea to kind of alternate back and forth. So here's one example of what you don't want. Oh, and we'll go ahead and apply easy ease to the second keyframes. So this is one end of the spectrum where everything's happening at the same time, and it's done. It's a little bit confusing to, especially with text. The viewer doesn't quite know what they need to be looking at. The other end of that spectrum is something like this, where we offset our animation, but now it's just one thing happening at a time. It's just kind of a boom, 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 staccato type motion. There's no overlapping motion. We don't see graphics start to come in until motion has already come to a stop. So for a few frames there, the screen is dead. So you've brought the flow to a screeching halt. Then graphics starts to flow in, and then boom, we come to a screeching halt for a few frames again before the next line comes in. What you want is something in between. So we're going to go to about 6 or 7 frames into the animation before graphics starts. Then we'll go forward another 6 or 7 frames from there, and the phrase make it move will start to come in. So if you look down here in the timeline, you can see exactly like the name suggests, we have overlapping action. Our keyframes are overlapping. They're not all happening at the same time, but they're also not happening in isolation. They're overlapping. So the word motion leads in. Naturally, the viewer knows to look there. It's going to draw your eye. So you look at the word motion. We start to read the word motion. Before motion has come to a stop, the word graphics starts to slide in, so our eye naturally moves to the second line of text. Before graphics comes to a stop, the phrase make it move starts to come in. So one motion is flowing naturally into the next motion. And if we render a RAM preview of that, you can see it kind of feels like one fluid motion. One kind of, this kind of cascading kind of flow of one line of text leading right into the next. So this is what we talk about when you hear us referring to overlapping action, and this is something you always want to try to do. You don't ever want your screen to come to a stop and feel like a still frame. Want to keep the screen active, keep it moving, keep things happening. That's it for overlapping action.